My name's Tal Kitron with Alparuth Tutoring Services. I've been with Alparuth for about a decade now in a few different capacities, but right now my role is an online premium tutor. I tutor mostly ACT, SAT, and PSAT, which I'm sure some of you or your children are taking tomorrow. And whether you are a student, educator, parent, guardian, or other, I think this presentation is going to be very interesting and informative. I've learned a lot about executive functioning over the past couple of years. And I think it's something that a lot of people are familiar with the term, but maybe not the framing. So this has also been known as just being conscientious throughout the years. They've called it different things. But today we're going to explain a little about what is executive functioning and how to coach and what Alparuth does. And as I said, as questions come up, just throw them in the chat. Our company, which started about a little over 20 years ago in Atlanta, has now expanded internationally. Our why is when you change students' self-beliefs, you change their lives. And as a teacher and tutor, and in each capacity I've worked in Alparuth, I've really felt that I'm able to trust my students. And especially when you're working on functioning or students with LDs, I think that's crucial. You have to have trust in your students so that they can trust in you and build a mentorship, friendship type relationship. What we offer, so my bread and butter is the test prep, but we also offer academic tutoring. So that's in-school subjects and APs. And then of course, what we're here for today, executive function coaching, which is a more recent thing that Alparuth has started offering. So what is it? Let's talk through what EF is. They're a set of processes, and we'll talk about which ones they are, but they're all kind of in the frontal lobe, and they're necessary for the cognitive control of behavior, meaning managing yourself, managing your body and your resources, monitoring behaviors and setting goals and making sure that you have set yourself up for success to achieve those goals. The functions that are included: organizing, planning, things that are day-to-day, both in school academically, but really in life. These are skills that can be developed and improved. And that's, I think, the key to today's webinar is these are skills. This is not something that you're necessarily born with. Certain people are stronger and have stronger executive functioning skills than others, but we develop these skills throughout life. I know that Dr. Alparuth, so Jed, who often gives this presentation and does a lot of executive function coaching, he works with students from about age 10 up to, I think, early 20s. But a lot of these things are developing into our 20s. Emotional regulation peaks in your 30s. So there are a lot of different benchmarks along the way. And this is something that even if you're not working with a coach, you will improve your executive function skills over time, just naturally, right? A 10-year-old's executive function skills will not be as good as that same person's are when they're 17. Here are some examples of what they are. You can see some three major categories of working memory. So what we kind of bring, short-term memory, but also just the things we use in day-to-day actions, flexibility and adaptability, and then self-control. So inhibition, you see a lot of those on the right-hand side. What I find in tutoring and executive function coaching is that time management and prioritization are two of the really, really big ones. We'll talk about some ways to help with that, but a big part of it is just recognizing that it's an issue. So a lot of executive function coaching is just asking questions and finding from the student where they are feeling like they're lacking, but also where they're feeling like they're strong, right? So maybe they know that prioritizing isn't their strength and they tend to procrastinate. Just knowing that is a step towards not fixing it, but addressing it. We'll also, executive functions involve goal setting and the follow through. So persistence, starting strong, consistency, finishing strong. We'll talk about that later. And then organization on every level, I think, can help with executive functions. And there's no hierarchy to these skills. So each person will be different. And that's what's, I think, great about it. It's the same with teaching and tutoring is there's no one size fits all, but that's especially true with executive functioning, because while someone may be very high level with planning, their time management might be lacking, and those interplay with each other. By definition, students I work with ADHD, if you have ADHD, by definition, you're lacking some of these skills. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone else has great time management skills or is wonderful at self-monitoring, but acknowledging, well, I don't have the strongest skills here and I can improve them is crucial. That's a step in of itself. That's the first part of this. And then eventually what a good EF coach does is they put the ball back into the student's court. All right, so no hierarchy. They're all just existing and sometimes working individually and sometimes in combination with one another. Some different ways to frame it. So Peg Dawson in Smart But Scattered says some of the foundational skills are controlling impulses. So that is just you're tempted and your mind goes on comfortable pathways. The big one is phone these days, right? It's going to be really hard, even for students who are great, to just put the phone down or not get drawn to it, right? Or student who's a musician and just wants to, has a thought and wants to play for 5 minutes. Sometimes I have a student who gets lost in that. It will take 30 minutes without even realizing. Working memory is another big one. We also want to look at transactive memory sources. So like if you don't remember passwords, that's okay, as long as you have a list and know where to find it. Or if you know you're often forgetting your calculator at school, then you need some sort of mechanism. And that could be many, many different things, depends on the person and the coach. But there are many things that could help you remember, all right, I usually leave this here. What's some new pathway I can create so that I don't forget it this time? We are not our thoughts or emotions. And so I think working on emotional control and not letting frustration run away. We'll talk a lot about positive reinforcement. So managing those emotions. Flexibility and adaptability. I mean, things change. And so, and you don't always expect what's going to happen. So we need to be able to not just commit to, if this goes all this way, I'm fine. But if you get some sort of thing thrown in, a curveball, you're still okay. You can adjust, you can adapt. For ADHD, students with ADHD, and for honestly, a lot of students who struggle with testing generally or timing, pacing, sustained attention can be an issue. So looking at ways to bring focus back, understanding it's okay to lose focus, right? Lean into that. We're not trying to just avoid it and make believe it didn't happen. And I think initiating tasks is also going to be a very helpful tool and important with executive function coaching, because a lot of people have trouble getting started. And once they do, they get going pretty quickly. I had issues with that in high school, but then when I structured and started my tasks early, I would be just fine. Mrs. Dawson's framework with advanced skills. So we've got our foundational here, and then the advanced skills are the ones like planning, prioritizing, organizing. So as parents or guardians, you have to be careful how much of that you do for your students, for your kids, because one big transition in the EF world is from high school to college. There's a bunch, right? There's from middle school to high school. So the 7th, 8th to 9th grade transition is often a really hard one, where people, I think Uproot does a lot of work with people there. Another big one is sophomore year to junior year, because the junior year grades are so important and the curriculum is often more difficult. So the jump from sophomore to junior can be a really huge step up. And then from senior year to undergrad, I mean, that's one where it's a total world shift, because now if you did rely on mom or dad to set your calendar and plan and remind you, you're going to be in trouble. It's going to be a big learning curve. So some of these advanced skills that we can be taught, they can be developed early, are time management, setting goals, and persisting and having depth to your work. And kind of the capstone, the gold standard to all of this is metacognition, meaning literally thinking about thinking. So we're going to talk a little bit more about metacognition, but someone who develops great metacognition, it can really help in all aspects of life. It can just make your life better, because you can access your other skills. You'll become better at planning, time management. That's you thinking and addressing any sort of blocks you have or just patterns. So if you can think about the way you think, that's step one in changing it, right? Adapting. So just to reinforce, I think that Appleruth and executive functioning, like Jed always used to say that a lot of his EF coaching used to be very academic focused, right? We're trying to help you with physics and calculus and AP US history. But over the years, I think based on the data that have come in and just the kind of education world and what people have been discussing, he's become more holistic in his approach, and Appleruth has, and I think it's by necessity. So this is not a, I'm struggling in this class, I need help. This is more of a, I'm having trouble being organized generally. And that's what EF coaching can help with. It's, all right, so let's talk about this class, this class, this class, what's the same, what's different. And really a lot of this is about asking the right questions. Because most students, especially students with LDs, really know very, very well where they are weak, but also where they're strong. So if we can develop these EF skills, really everything you do, both in your childhood, adolescent, and adult life, it will really help. They carry over into work, hobbies, activities, right? So these are things that can really be developed in life and help you a ton. That's why coaching is not just for kids. You know, adults and especially younger adults can really benefit from it while their frontal cortex is still developing. This is just another framework. So you can see a lot of the aspects of EF are about self-regulation and learning your own way. I always try to send students into test day feeling confident, motivated, but also, I think, very much understanding what to expect. So that's the calibration of comprehension, knowing like what we know and what we don't know. Metacognition, so if I hit a portion of the reading section on the SAT that I really struggle with, I know that if I move past it and come back to it, that will help my momentum and my confidence, right? So all these things can work in unison, but they also work on their own, and they're all skills that can be developed over time with a thoughtful approach. Back to metacognition, so thinking about thinking. I think this is probably the coolest part of EF and maybe the most important. And what a really good teacher will generally do is make sure that their students are understanding not just the material, but their best way of learning it. So when we talk about metacognition, it's really about me understanding how my own learning is going, understanding when I need help and how to ask for it, understanding who to ask for help. For me, even now, I know when I get hungry and overstimulated, I'm not very nice. And that's when it's time for a break, right? Otherwise, my wife will impose one upon me. But that's true for everyone. We've got these things that we know affect us in certain ways, and we can't really address that or change it or even work with it until we acknowledge that it's a thing. So once you do and you understand, all right, when I'm really hot, I tend to get stressed out, and then everything else kind of is weaker. What can I do when that happens? Right. So first is you don't want to be denying that you're hot and sweating. You want to just say, okay, well, I can take my jacket off. Maybe that'll help. Right. I've got my ice water here. So there are a lot of things that you just have to be checking in on as a good learner, and a good EF coach can really help with that. This all comes back to self-awareness. So Judy Bass is a colleague of Jed's. But this is not just about how you do. So students who take practice test after practice test won't improve unless they use it, right? If you take a test, you got to learn from it. Go back, look at the results. The most important thing for people to understand is their strengths, but it is also important to understand weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and various challenges or obstacles. And I really believe in this quote: students who know what they are good at are much better off than those who only know what they are bad at. So I don't let my students talk like that ever. Right? If someone comes in saying I'm bad at math, I'll challenge that notion, because it's not true. I mean, bad compared to what, right? Maybe there are some content gaps and we can address that, or maybe you don't feel confident with this process, but I think there's a lot of self-defeating with students who have executive functioning issues or just aren't as strong. And so it's very, very important to be self-aware, but also not self-defeating, right? So really a lot of positive reinforcement is huge. We can teach students to reflect, right? So you can look back to help move forward. So look back at past experiences, especially positive ones, right? If this person says, well, I'm bad at like grammar tests, you look back, was there ever a time that you did well? Can we create a time where you do well? And these questions are all golden. You should be able to do a whole session without really saying much, right? You want the student to come to realizations, and you can do it together, you're collaborating. So you want the person to be asking, okay, this time it worked. I got this question right. How did that work? On this one that wasn't good, what didn't work, right? That's a great question to ask. Well, what can I learn from this experience going forward, right? What would I do next time differently? Let's dig into this. Let's explore this. Let's chew on that. Like there are so many different ways to say that, but all of them useful, right? Because it's open-ended, it's non-judgmental, right? So our goal is just to look back so that we can learn and move forward. And you can coach students to become better at that individually. I always come at teaching and tutoring and coaching from a curious perspective. One, because I'm genuinely curious about my students and their lives and whatever's relevant to what we're working on. And two, because I think people see that interest, they feel it, right? When someone's asking you questions about you or your family, that feels good. What we want to do is anytime there's something negative, we reframe that. It doesn't have to be a negative. If you make a mistake, we will learn much more from that mistake than from a correct answer. So failure is going to happen along the way with anything you're trying that's worth anything. But learning without mistakes is not learning. We are going to have to try things that aren't going to work. I think it's important at the outset to let people know this is a safe place to make mistakes, right? You can make mistakes, you can feel okay about that, and that's all right. I'm not going to judge you negatively, right? Sometimes the students just need a safe place, right? That's not with their parents or with a formal teacher. They just need a safe place to make mistakes. Here's Kathleen Kreese's method of chunk, chew, check, which I like a lot. This is about how do we learn. A lot of teachers, especially math teachers, will just pack in a lot of information, and then they don't give the students time to try it, practice it, really digest it, and then we don't check it to make sure. So they say, okay, I've taught you this, you know it, here's the test. But really, you have to start giving yourself breaks. Every 10 minutes you teach something new, you need a couple minutes off, right? So it doesn't matter if it's virtually or in person. You go a couple of new things, couple topics, break, and then make sure that this person is really understanding it. You check it, right? So not just content, because people will lose focus. Famous name in academics, John Dewey, we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. Very true. Another thing we need to do is teach students to become more adaptable. I think it's a big strength always. And just like life, you don't want to be too rigid in your approach. You can have values, you can have certain guidelines that direct you in your actions, but certain things are going to be unexpected, right? Conditions sometimes change. And let's say you were learning online Zoom for Algebra 1, whatever worked on that with a new teacher, Algebra 2, different subject, different setting, it might not work as well. So the acknowledgement that just one size doesn't fit all, and even if this worked last year on math, it might not work this year. I think cultivating frustration tolerance is important too. So this is all about also emotional regulation. It's okay to feel frustration, right? You can even see that sometimes in a student's eyes. What's important is for a coach or teacher not to get frustrated back, right? It's like, okay, I see that you're frustrated. Let's unpack it. Let's talk about why. What's the part here that's really making you angry? Let them vent a little bit, right? We can then try new things, try it differently. And yeah, it's just important to understand if you're frustrated with this, I'm sure you're not the only one. So challenges, mistakes are not only important, they're crucial. I think there's some bias against students with low executive functioning skills, and students with LDs, and students who just are lower performing in grades in general. Almost always, when I taught in a public school, I almost always remember sometimes being surprised, but then quickly not so much, that when a student presented as unmotivated, didn't care, didn't want to try, a lot of times that was a defense mechanism. And it was just, they haven't learned the skills. Somewhere in 7th, 8th grade, they lost track of what it was and just haven't learned the skills. And so aren't confident. And because of that, they present as, confused or just kind of more laid back, just trying to make an effort not to try or seem like that because they don't feel confident or competent. But if you give them some strategies for success and you can tell, hey, this works for you, let's try it, you've shown it, it works, some success, some reinforcement, and motivation will come back, right? So I've seen a lot of students who it's like, my God, they're just really devastated and really not feeling this class. But with a little bit of a nudge in the right direction and just some reinforcement, some success, you'll see that motivation come right back. And that's a beautiful sight. We also want to move past shame, right? Which is a tough thing. Students with academic struggles have often just had feelings of being less than, they feel stupid, they've been labeled as that. And it's hard not to internalize some of that negative talk. Those students will sometimes be the ones who come and say, I'm bad at math, right? And you just need to help them regulate emotions and that critical self-talk. Again, you can't talk like that. It's like, no, you're not bad at math. Talk to me about what you don't like about it. Which part of math is your least favorite? Are there any parts that you do like? And there's almost always something that's like, okay, I'm good at this. If they say no, you can try some easy math and say, okay, so I can see that you're good at this. So much of this, even with high school students who you would think would have some self-belief at 16, 17, I mean, thinking back to when you were that age, a lot of them don't, and just need a little bit of guidance and reinforcement, which I think a nice coach can offer. And it's important to kind of show that these are skills that can be developed. So you are not fundamentally flawed. These are not innate talents that people are born with or not born with. So it is okay to be behind on skills. We'll just work on that. And these are challenges, they're unsolved problems, which is a really great way to put it, not deficits that are just innate or intrinsic. So yeah, this is an issue, but I'm here, you're here, let's work on it. We can fix this. And ultimately, I think some coaches make the mistake, really good coaches, of wanting to be a guru and I'm going to guide you through this. You don't want to be the guru as a coach. You want to be a mentor and start to pass on the skills to the student so that they can teach it back to you, right? That's the goal. Sensory issues. So overstimulation, but also understimulation. So boredom can definitely impair executive function, plus the need for focus and attention. Jed mentions that when he hears like a slight noise, like a clock ticking, it'll drive him crazy. So early on in the days of Appleruth, he replaced all of the ticking clocks with silent clocks. And that's actually interestingly a sign of genius. If you can't get tiny little noises out of your head, if you hear a ticking sound, you just may be a genius. And I've seen a lot. So proprioception is really just like the way it's called the sixth sense by some, but kind of our need to move or fidget. So if you know you want to be doing something with your hands, whether that's tossing something, bouncing a ball, just, I don't know, holding something, holding a pen. Some people really do need to do that, and it improves their executive function when they're doing it. Some people can work really well. For me, like when I was in law school, I couldn't work in a library because some people loved it. They needed other people around them working. I wanted to be at home, so that when I needed to go to sleep, I could take a nap, and I could wake up. And as far as hearing, I also don't like the little noises. So I had headphones in oftentimes. I would listen to music. Certain types of music worked, certain types did not. Sometimes touch and smell. I mean, you don't want to be working with a very strong smell in the background, right? So like if you're cooking broccoli in the kitchen, that's a hard place to study. And then vestibular issues. So anytime people have those, like dizziness, et cetera, but even taste. So all these things are just things to keep in mind. And those with LDs or processing or ADHD often tend to just have a better sense of their sensory over or under stimulation. So when I say I trust my students, the ones who have these issues often really know it. Like I had one student who, this is the only student ever I've had who did better audially than visually. And almost everyone's the other way around. But it was because when he was younger, he had an auditory issue and everything sounded like it was underwater. So he had to work really hard on understanding, and that became his strongest sense. Right. And so understanding that, I wouldn't have known that going in, but he and his mom explained it to me. And then it really helped me understand how this person can learn best. I'm going to talk through some keys to EF coaching. I know that we've been sprinkling them in along the way. Step one is going to be putting the relationship first. So this is Dr. Sharon Celine's 5 C's. The relationship between the coach and the student takes center stage always. So you're teaching self-control, but you're also wanting to really exude compassion. I make it clear this is a collaborative process. This is not me, this is not you, this is us, right? So the word we is always coming out of my mouth. And I do feel that way. I mean, it's not blowing smoke. Consistency. So I know what Jed usually does is he'll start a couple times a week, 30 minutes, and he wants to pretty quickly get that to once a week, 30 minutes, right? Give the student the tools, scaffold, teach, and then have them run with it and check in. And then, if he's working with someone up until college, then he wants it more to be just for a big life event or something that they really need guidance on. They can reach out and schedule a session. So I know that's how he operates. Celebration. So yeah, this is huge. Everything good has to be reinforced and really should be, right? There's so many challenges these days, and being like a sophomore, junior, senior in high school is so hard. So you have to celebrate the little things and the wins. I think that's really crucial. And coaches know this. But yeah, we are looking at, okay, well, this is a problem we need to solve. We're going to solve it together. An academic challenge is just a problem to solve, whether it's the teacher or a test coming up. But life is full of problems, right? This is, you never, there's never a lack of problems to solve in life. There are various different levels of them, but you can lay out, and I think students often have never done this. So lay out, here are the things that are actually plaguing me. I'm feeling anxious, but then you write it out. Here's why. I understand I can't do it all at once, but my mind, until I write it down, may not understand that. Right? So we have to separate it out. As coaches, we're modeling how to solve problems and prioritize and be proactive, not reactive. So not, oh crap, I've got a test tomorrow. It's, oh, I've got a test coming up on Friday. It's Monday. Here's my plan. And if you can start to peel those layers off, if you solve a problem, you'll kind of see, man, well, this one's also resolved. Because this problem was just, I was feeling anxious about writing back to someone, but then I realized how easy it was. And then I wrote back to the other 4 emails I was delinquent on. So this is a collaborative approach, it needs to be. And we're building skills. So I always like to have my students start it out, like this shows trust, right? Your ideas matter. What do you think? How should we start? Any ideas? It's okay if the answer is no. So then it's, well, what is this question asking? Or what did the writers give us? Right? You can ask questions and really get through it without giving any sort of hard statements of fact. This is teaching the invaluable skill of problem identification and then generating solutions. That's something that we do all day, every day. But the problem identification for some people comes naturally. It's like, oh, I know that what's bothering me is, the Windows screen has a scratch in it, and I know that's bothering me. Some people don't have that insight into what's bothering them. And so that's what a good coach can do, is really help you think through, just ask the right questions. Is like, what are the things that are really on your mind? What's bothering you? Why do you feel frustrated? And sometimes it's just that conversation will lead to so many insights. and some that the student themselves haven't even thought of before. We can facilitate planning by encouraging students to think about how they do what they do. So questions like, what was your goal? Just looking back at a project, how'd you start this? If people are showing work on a math problem, you can kind of trace back what strategies you used. How did that help? What will you do next time? What will you do differently? So again, developing long-term competencies. That's from just another coach, Jack Naglieri. And as I said, positive, gotta always reinforce it, even the small victories, so incremental improvements. So it may not seem like something, but let's say you just were getting Fs on your calculus test and now you're getting Cs. That's not perfect, but that's huge progress. Even if your goal was all As, if you recalibrate and said, well, I'm not failing, and this is much better, you have to draw attention to that and show, hey, look what you did to make this happen. This was you. Right? You did this, you can do it again. Second one is shifting ownership to the student. And buy-in is huge. So first session is really important. Better make sure that the student knows you care. So it's important that you actually care. Different students are going to be very different in every way, but motivationally. And you have to, before you want to set goals and discuss, here's how this will help you, figure out what they like, right? So if the cell is, here's a test I want to be done with by end of this year, then you know. If it's, I'm going to take this as many times as I can and get the highest score possible, then that's a different outcome, and you have to have a different approach. Whose goals are we serving? So it's really hard for kids to take anything from parents like at this time of life, and I'm sure parents know this. So that's part of it, is like a coach can just be a non-parent. Knowing that your goals might not be aligned with your child's goals, and then you should meet them where they are. I think that's important, because really students know that if it's their parents' willpower driving them to apply to the school or do this thing or take this class, that often creates more challenges. We need the student to be driven and embrace their work. We're not fixing, right? So active listening, which is just, I think I hear what you're saying, let me make sure, and saying it back, and being open to the idea that maybe you didn't hear it correctly. But you always want to take your time. You don't need to jump in to say, okay, here's what you do. I've seen this before. You're not a guru. You are a listener. You can empathize and just feel the feelings with the student, connect, and then think together. Well, here's maybe what I might try is this. What do you think about that? Or have you tried this? Right? That's really what it's all about. And we can push towards discomfort. So don't want to go too far into that, or else they will not enjoy the sessions, but you want to develop some frustration for tolerance. So past comfort zone, but not into total frustration mode. And like we said earlier, we have to have setbacks, right? What happened? What do we do differently? No need for shame or judgment. We're responsible, the student is, and accountable to change what we need to change. So making sure the students own it, not that it's a bad thing, but this is a thing that happened. Third big tool for an EF coach is understanding the complexity of a quote unquote simple task. So even if it seems simple to me, just remembering my phone, a student who struggles with executive function issues might be really difficult for them. They might really have a block, and unless they set up some new pathway, they're going to forget their phone, or they're going to have this issue on this history test always. So breaking things down beyond belief, like just every little nitty-gritty thing, not just, are you setting an alarm? It's, what are you using to set that alarm? Are you setting more than one? What kind of sound is it? Is it on vibrate? Is it always? Like little things like that, when you're talking about technology, you really want to break it down into the tiniest bits. And of course, always ask questions so they can tell you, here's where things are going wrong. So this is, for an example, like don't just say write down your homework. It's, all right, are you always writing it down in the same place? Is every subject in the same spot? Is there one subject that you need more accessible? Is it just piled in your backpack, or do you have folders? So there's a whole lot of steps to that it can feel like, well, this is obvious for some, but it can really be a lot to break down for students who've never thought about this before. You want to make every step smaller and manageable. So working memory, I've seen transitions be an issue. I had a student who, when she would go from her mom's to her dad's house, separated. And at her mom's house, she pretty much always had everything, but at her dad's house, she always tended to forget the book elsewhere. And that's something that can be worked on. So lower executive function students can struggle with that kind of transition, house to school, class to class, house to house. And so you just want to be able to anticipate those. I know that I'm going on Wednesday from moms to dads, so here are the things I'm going to pack on Tuesday night. Right? It's easy to get derailed, acknowledge that's okay, set up processes for yourself. And we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but all phases are important. So you have to help initiate. That can be huge, but some students are good at that, but just they have a problem with the follow through, the persistence, and others just need help getting across the finish line. They just got to send that assignment in. Each time you work on something like that and improve, that's a skill that then you have developed more for the future. Speaking of the future, we always plan backwards. So even if talking about standardized tests, we're looking at March and May SATs. So we want to have weekly sessions leading up to May, weekly sessions leading up to March. Let's work backwards from those tests. If you know that you've got an assignment due at the end of the week, but the teacher's office hours are on Wednesday, you don't want to start Thursday in case you run into an issue. Future you is a very important you when thinking about executive function. And sometimes, you say, this is a problem for future me, but in reality, it will be. So anticipate issues and make sure you're looking forward. All right, last couple of things. One is creating a smart system that's thinking digitally, physically. So you don't want clutter on your desk. There are students who, if they've just got everything all around, they can't work. And as soon as it's clearer, boom, clutter's gone, both mentally and physically. If you do this at the macro level, so every week or every day you're setting up things, it will help you in little tasks too, with papers, projects, assignments. What does that look like? So I think phone is a huge thing. I use my phone, Gmail calendar, and alarms for everything. And I know sometimes if I'm doing a bunch of meetings in a day and I have a 45-minute rest and I lay on the couch, I'm liable to fall asleep. So I better set an alarm before I do that. Right? If not, I'm just going to sleep through a session, which isn't really acceptable. So you want to ask students, how are you managing things? What, where, when, how? I think a lot of it, the why is self-explanatory, but asking these questions can help the student actually obtain insight into their own mentality and process. Sometimes they're not thinking too much about that. So we build good habits. What habits are good? Which ones are helping you and which ones are not? So maybe someone thinks that, well, they're really into news and they think that that's helping them, but then they keep getting distracted and pulled, and they're not able to self-control or inhibit that pull to go to the news websites or Twitter or Snapchat or whatever it is. And it can be, if people are addicted to those things, it can be hard to change, hard to resist. So sometimes you have to kind of show, here's why this works. Look, we just spent 30 minutes without it. Look how much we accomplished. Right, but the phone is the big one these days. It's hard. We talked about overstimulation, right? We only have enough attention to go around. So the more cluttered, the worse it is. So we could talk about clean slating. Everyone probably remembers Marie Kondo. If it doesn't spark joy, or more so if it sparks anxiety, minimize, downsize, declutter, essentialize, rebuild. Make it structured and neat and clean. And we also want the systems to be simple and visual. So a lot of times, a lot of EF coaches just like the big calendars, huge calendars that you're writing stuff up. You want to just be thinking about each part. What organization will help me both physically, virtually, to efficiently get what you need and be confident, right? So you want to label things and things that are easy to read or identify. You don't want to have to be doing actual thought or trying to decipher something when it's just a system labeled by you for yourself. And everyone's different. So something that might be good for me, like the Google Calendar, might not be good. I have to really go in thinking not as myself, but I'm just trying to help this student and meet them where they are. Right. So there might be better tools that I don't even know about. I'm sure there are apps that I don't use that control screen time much better than I do. I just turn on, I turn off JavaScript and I block all cookies. And then there are very few websites that can actually load. So that's a pretty awful way of doing it, but it's effective to me if I don't want to get hooked into the daily news, for example, or sports scores and so on. Listen to the students' needs. They really do usually know what they want. Sometimes they're not able to say what it is or articulate it perfectly, but with the right questions and with building trust, they usually will. And then you can help them. You can say, well, everyone's different. Let's work on this together. A good system is any system that gets used. So you can build a great system, it can be wonderful, but if you don't implement it or use it consistently, not helpful. But for example, if you, even just for exercise, right, which I think is a part of this, for a lot of people, just getting physical exercise each day can change everything about their functioning and their performance in school and in life. And once you start working out or exercising in the zone, many of us have noticed that feeling of, oh, this actually is less effort. This is my pathway. I'm going to do this and I like it. The system is just kind of leading me there. So you do want to create some automation where students know certain things are in place. And so there's not like every time I'm thinking about not forgetting this thing here, now I know I've got a mechanism. So they're not like stressing and thinking constantly, how do I do this? Right? The goal is to make life easier, but sometimes along the way, it does require some pretty intense self-reflection and hard work. But the ultimate goal is to make your life better and easier. That's what EF coaching can do. Here's that big calendar that a lot of the coaches like. And there are a lot of different apps you can use as well. So for digitally, you want to make sure your links are organized. If you use Chrome for your browser, I always cringe when I see students who've got like 500,000 new emails or a million tabs open. Some people can deal with it. Like it actually makes my heart rate go up when I see them share their screen and they've got all that stuff on there. So I always make sure it's just a few tabs, everything's in folders. I know the emails I have to respond to and the ones I'm waiting for a response, and that has saved me a lot of stress. Google Calendar is a big lifesaver. You can even plan out breaks. I feel like that's important. I've had to do that even in this stage of life of just, I'm going to put a break on my calendar so that I'm not doing laundry or doing something household, especially working from home can be hard, right? So doing something in the household that's not actually restful, but going to build my stress and anxiety if I don't actually take 20 minutes to just rest my brain. And even in a session, right? If it's a 90-minute session for tutoring, I'll say, well, let's take a few minutes in the middle, stretch your brain or stretch your legs, rest your brain. And it's often like you see just when they come back, they're just so much more raring to go. Whereas right before the break, we're dragging. This is what like one schedule example could look like. You can see you built in sleep and Starbucks or sleep or Starbucks after your final exams. So this looks like maybe a college schedule. And this is something a coach can review with the student and say, okay, well, let's look at this. Let's make sure that you've got everything built in. What's happening in this time? You don't have anything planned here, et cetera. What are you most worried about, right? Which ones are the things that are going to come up later in this week that are going to cause some sort of stress? And how do we address? Start somewhere. You just, if you're in high school, dump your backpack on the floor, get it organized, figure out which books are in there that you're hauling around for no reason and which ones you can maybe leave. You don't want to have redundancies. So if you've got these 2 hand sanitizer things, you can get rid of one of them, right? We've collected things as the year goes on. If you have pliers, I'm not sure why those are there, but make sure that you just keep what you need. Make your environment calm and gentle and appealing for yourself. So if you know that when you're in certain settings, and let's say it's even just in a room in your house where there's a TV or where your phone's accessible, you have to, or you want to make it easier to make the right choice. So maybe the phone's charging in the kitchen while you're doing work, or maybe you don't work in the room with the TV because that way you won't be distracted, right? So if you have this disciplined environment, you don't have to work as hard. Minimize your distractions. That's important, or learning how to tune them out. Study area, so knowing this is where I work, this is my work zone, it's clean, it's clear, this is where I work always. And then other tools help you focus. So some music might be good for you. If you know it's not, then maybe just a white noise machine or chewing gum. All these little things can help. No phones. Yeah, that's one thing that stresses me out, is when you've got that many things open on a desktop. So what's on, like, what apps are always open and like giving you notifications? Do you really need that? Which tabs are open that you can close? So yeah, make sure it's crisp. All right, home stretch here. The other things that we want to make sure we're teaching is inhibition. So this goes with the phone, but people have these pathways and it's really easy to go down them. It could be eating, it could be video games, it could be something more productive like reading or playing music. But if you're doing those things instead of doing your work, or instead of doing something you have to do, then that's an easy pathway, and you want to try to move away from it. So here's some of these blockers that I know that some of my students use and some adults use. Safe focus is a good one. It'll just, if you're on a certain app or website for too long, it'll just block you out. There's screen times. There's also personal focus on iPhones, where you can only have one person have their call come through. So if you are working in a study group and you need messages from these people, but no one else, you can put your phone on personal focus. Big tool. And maybe, if you like to play video games, but that always sucks you in for an hour and then you waste time, maybe you can just take a minute and make a little drawing or do something different that rests your brain, but doesn't totally take you off path. We want to make what is hard easy and what is easy hard. So if you feel like going on Twitter or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever gets in the way, make it harder to access. Turn off JavaScript on your internet browser. If planning is not easy for you, how can we make it easy and better suited to you? So this is a good coach will kind of work with the student and say, if that's really hard to plan out in advance, what are the things that we can do to help you? And for the first round, you might have to really work with them and do it together, but you want to make sure that they can do it the next time and teach it back to you. Clocks, watches, timers. I mean, again, I'm doing it all on my phone with the stopwatch lap function, but some people want a real watch or clock physically, and just understanding like that you have to have boundaries. So if you do set a schedule of 45 minutes for going outside to play basketball, make sure it's really 45 minutes, and then you're going back to do work when you're supposed to. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes, and I think we're in the last few slides, so we'll have a little bit of time for questions. Feel free to start typing them in. The last few things I want to make sure that we note is when coaching for executive functioning skills, we want to create that division of work and play. Even this is as simple as when you're eating breakfast, you shouldn't be on your phone looking at the day's assignments or work. Just eat breakfast. If you walk the dog, I always have headphones in, but I'm not trying to also text my friends, because it will detract from both my social interaction, but also the dog walk and my enjoyment of just being outside. When you're working, you're working. When you're playing. Separate them and try to do both. I know that's hard. Junior year, especially, people don't really sleep. So do try to set aside time for fun stuff if you can. The last one is just self-regulation, self-care. So I mentioned exercise and taking breaks and building in breaks. But I've noticed for me, that's a huge one. If I don't get exercise, I'm often just more down and have trouble focusing and less likely to be motivated, versus when I do and I start to do it routinely, it can really help in almost every aspect of life. I also recommend meditation for that. And even just like briefly sitting down, closing your eyes, laying down. I think people are always plugged in, and just unplugging for 10, 15 minutes is invaluable. Got Garfield here, food, exercise, sleep. Again, juniors are probably laughing, what is sleep? I don't sleep, but a regular sleep schedule is really important. I tell people 2 days before a test, the night before is the most important night's sleep. So you can build in your good circadian rhythms. And definitely ability to focus and concentrate is tied to sleep. In law school, I had a lot of friends who were staying up all night. And for me, it was not that necessarily my method was better, but for me, what worked was if I got tired, I went to sleep. And even if that was like midnight and I had something due, I went to sleep for 3 or 4 hours. I'd wake up at 3 or 4 a.m. and I'd finish. And that worked for me, whereas it wouldn't work for my roommate, for example. Short breaks always, especially if you're on the screen, you want to always be looking away and just resting your eyes. But active breaks are wonderful. Small breaks, even if it's just like a tiny little bit, a power nap, or even like a 1 minute, I'm going to get water and get a snack and come back. Right? Really important to do that. Otherwise, you will just keep draining and not realizing. And then self-talk. So again, I'm big on this with students, but it can keep you on a good path or make you feel worthless depending on how you are dialoguing with yourself. Is your student cultivating this good inner coach who is this higher self saying, you're doing this well, I see what you're here for, this part is great, like, good job, you got this? Or is it more like, I hate this part of me, I want to stop it, right? We need to be very careful that students are being kind to themselves. And again, positive reinforcement, celebrate wins as we go. And then asking for help is not something people are very good at in society, but there are a lot of ways, and people want to think about what works best for them or what they think will work best, and then actually go do it. So internet searches, right? If you don't know something, you could probably figure it out. Office hours of teachers, emailing teachers. If you need something from peers, reaching out. And if you don't feel comfortable, thinking about who you might feel comfortable sharing that with. Even if it's a parent, or if it's an EF coach, or if it's a college counselor, if you share that you're uncomfortable asking for what you need with someone who's helpful, then ideally they will help you. They will help you find what you need and work with you. So I think that's important. Ask for what you need. I want to make sure my students know they can ask for what they need. And yeah, it's good to interact with teachers early and often so that you can get recommendations from them. And then finally, effective advocacy. So I think this goes back to what I was saying, but who's the right person to ask for help? Not everyone has a person, which is sad and hard, but try to find someone who you feel like you can trust. And that's what an EF coach can do, is teach them how to effectively seek help, who to go to, and how to frame things, and that it's okay to ask for help and good. High-level takeaways from today: keep the relationship primary. The most important thing is the relationship between the coach and the student. It should be a mentorship, friendship, trusting relationship. You want to also shift ownership pretty early on. So this is not, I'm here to tutor and show you, like, we're going to work together to find a system for you, and then it's yours. And I'm just going to check in to make sure you're doing it. Don't just think because a task is simple for you as an adult or a coach that it's simple for everyone else. So something can be really complex, even if it seems just very easy to you. Smart systems, self-regulation, self-care, self-monitoring. There's a cool little quiz on Appleruth. So there's a link to that if you'd like to take that. I definitely will get you guys out of here at the end of the hour. We've got a few minutes for questions. And before we get there, a reminder of what Appleruth does. And the way it works is you can call in, and there's no obligation for that. So you can schedule a 15-minute time. I put the link there, but it's also available if you want to call that number or email info@appleruth.com. What we do is, for $150, there's a diagnostic consultation. The mind print is super cool. It's like basically a mock test for executive functioning. I think it's like a 15 or 20-minute test that is just really interesting. And then the team will match you with a coach based on need and personality, et cetera. Get the 30-minute one-on-one consultation, and then the plan, which again, I think usually would be 30-minute sessions is often what you want. couple times a week, maybe to start, but get to 30 minutes once a week, ideally. And it very much depends on the person as far as how long it should take, when to start. The benchmarks we often see are like that 7th, 8th to 9th, so middle to high school, 10th to 11th, because junior year is so crazy, and then graduating high school to college. Big shift. So we're going to launch a quick poll. And just if you're still here and want to fill that out, all this is just if you're an educator, student, parent, guardian, click all that, and anything that you'd like from Appleruth. And as you all fill that out, I'm just going to answer the few questions we have. So first is the average amount of time to spend with one student doing EF coaching. It's hard to say average. I think usually the average is shorter, a few months, but there are certainly students we work with from age 10, all the way up until 22. That changes, right, once you get into mid-20s and in college, but it can definitely last years. It can be 1 year, it could be months, so it really varies, but longest is probably 12, 15 years, and then they're just, at that point, they're just kind of friends. I missed the beginning, but I'm a parent of a junior who struggled since middle school with EF. We've tried everything that you've mentioned. Where do we go from here? He cares and tries, but hasn't improved. I would maybe try this diagnostic. I do think that we've got some amazing coaches, and what I can guarantee is that they will be dedicated and personalize it to your student. I would try it. I think it's frustrating. I'm sorry that this stuff hasn't really helped, but I think a lot of it then might just be reframing that and finding the right coach who can say, well, it's not like you're at the same point that you were in middle school. Right now you're in high school and you have improved here, 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 and here. Try to get him to see, well, here are all the things that I've actually developed. So it may just be having the right coach, I think, is a lot of it. How do I get my junior on board? So I think this is the place to start. We call it Appleruth. Again, that's no commitment. Most of our program advisors are tutors or former tutors or even coaches, so they really know their stuff. And they're not going to do a hard sell or anything. So I would just call in, and yeah, you can get more info on the website. Last question, I'll let you guys go. Is it typical to see a struggle with juniors and motivation? Haven't seen it in the last few years. Yeah, not everyone, but the junior year curriculum is really crazy, and a lot of people are taking many AP exams. So I would say, yes, that is pretty typical. And sometimes the answer is you have to take some things off their plate. Like maybe we can't take this many APs. Sometimes I've had a lot of students, unfortunately, quitting their sports because it's just too much of a time commitment. But I definitely have seen motivation be an issue, and there are myriad factors that could cause it. So I think with that, it's really just, that's one place a coach could help, is like, why are you feeling this way? What can we do? What are the things? And a lot of times kids just won't feel comfortable sharing that with a parent, but they will with a coach or a tutor or a teacher. So I think that's one of the huge benefits. All right, we've hit 7 p.m. Mountain Time, 9 p.m. Eastern. I really appreciate you guys joining. Hope it was helpful, and please feel free to reach out to Appleruth with more questions. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday evening.